Greg, good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing great, DA. How are you, my man?
I'm doing great as well. Thanks so much for joining us. And this has been a week of friction in the NBA. Seems like we got a couple of nights in a row where we've got guys battling against one another. On the one hand, you go, boy, I mean, do you really need to be doing that? On the other hand, is this actually somewhat refreshing to know that these guys have this much competitive animosity?
It is. I think you just hit it on the head. They care. You know, it can get personal out there. And sometimes I think because the league has become so personable and, you know, it seems like everybody likes or loves each other and everyone's friendly, we tend to lose sight of that. But we got a bit of a rude awakening in that respect over the last few nights, and I think it can be healthy as long as it doesn't go overboard. And for the most part, I don't think it did. It gives us something to talk about other than the way the Cavs are struggling, how good Golden State's looked at times, and some of the other storylines.
You played with some rough and tumble teams, including the New York Knicks, at a time when playing the Pacers or the Bulls was almost instantaneously, or the Heat, a fight waiting to happen. Did you guys ever feel like going back channels around the back hallways and going into the locker room?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah, that was not uncommon in terms of the thought process. There really was a tremendous amount of dislike, but you know there was also a high level of respect. That was part of the reason why you did dislike them, because you respected them. And again, that's all fine in terms of being competitive. I don't think. Listen, it's a little different today because the guys that are playing today, these guys have all known each other since middle school, literally. You know, they've been playing at a high level against one another for so many years, so there's a little bit more involved personally. And sometimes the fans and we in the media want to equate that as maybe they're not as competitive. And I don't think that is the case at all. These guys are all ultra competitive. They all want to win. They all got big egos. And at times we get to see that on display. And unfortunately, when we do see it, it doesn't always manifest itself the way it was in our era, right? But that's also because the game's different. They're not going to allow the physical altercations or physical play to the same level. And I think it's a better game for it. You know, some people like to see all the rough and tumble. I prefer to see the ultimate skill that gets displayed when you start looking at some of the top teams in our league.
Greg Anthony joins us from Turner Sports. If there was a guy leading the charge into an opposing locker room when you were playing, was it going to be Oakley?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And the only guy that I can recall that really had no equals. No one really ever wanted to challenge Oak. It was more a matter of if. You know, you'd rather just be on his side. You know, that was kind of the way it was. Just literally nobody ever, because you know, not only was he obviously is a physically imposing specimen, but he also, from a mental standpoint, you knew if things went awry, he was going to be a guy that was ready to handle his business. So he'll go down. He is a legend when it comes to that, you know, and to this day, he still has the utmost respect from his peers.
You know, the one thing that's interesting about this animosity is it feels like it comes from former teammates. We've had Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. Now we have CP3 and Blake Griffin and the rest of the Clippers. We've seen, I think, animosity between LeBron and Kyrie Irving. Is that the one thing that can really drive a wedge in today's NBA? Yeah, you grow up with these guys since they're in middle school and you're at a lot of parties together and whatnot. But if you're former teammates and then your enemies, that's where all that kind of breaks apart?
That is a level of it. There's no doubt. We talked about it last night on our broadcast. You know, a lot of times when you get traded, it is a little personal, particularly that first time when you go back. How about Isaiah Thomas?
Yeah.
You know, in Boston, I think even that one more so. I mean, it's well documented how personal that was, and that does bring about emotions. And again, you know what? It gives you a different storyline, and I like it. You know, you don't want to see anybody get hurt. You know, I thought the whole Clipper Rockets thing. I just found it entertaining. You know, nothing ultimately came of it, as should be the case. Aaron Aflalo last night, that was pretty vicious. That swing that he took at the big fella. that would always tell people, like, when you see something like that, either something happened earlier in the game or something happened earlier in the day. You know, either something's going on in his life that's got him to a point where he can react that way, because generally those are the two areas that bring that to mind. When a guy reacts that way, it's either really personal with that player or something personal within that player's personal life. So we'll have to wait and see how that one all plays out. I'm sure he's going to get suspended for it. But yeah, it made the night a little more entertaining, to say the least.
That's a really good way to put it. Greg Anthony joins us here on the show. Anthony Davis with a back-to-back 40-point games against the Knicks and Celtics. The only guy there to do that was Wilt Chamberlain, and he was pretty good. And, I mean, you had Anthony Davis last night, 45 points and 16 rebounds. Is AD proving that you can win big with him if you support him with the right type of guys, or did we know that already?
I think we knew it. Listen, he still doesn't have a team when you break down their roster that's on an elite level. You know, now Cousins obviously is an elite talent. Drew Holiday showed some stretches last night where, you know, he's shown you what he can be, but the consistency hasn't been there. And I think that's a big part of the problem. You know, we were talking about it last night. When you think about the best teams in our league, they all have 3-4 guys that can basically carry you. You know, it's one of the things about Houston that sometimes gets lost. You know, we know about Chris Paul, obviously James Harden and their brilliance, but, you know, Eric Gordon's become one of those guys. You know, he's having an all-star caliber season, and that's one reason why I think their team has elevated. You look at Minnesota, you know, Wiggins and Towns, two young talents that had proven they could get it done in terms of their individual ability, but now you put Jimmy Butler into the mix, who's another true all-star, who's a guy I'd have starting in the all-star game this year. That's how good he's been. Now you see how much that's elevated Minnesota. New Orleans still doesn't have that guy, that other guy, and I think that's going to be the big challenge for them moving forward. Can they get Cousins signed, and then can they continue to develop a roster that's going to complement him? Because Anthony Davis' talent is off the charts. You know, just watching how easy the game is for him. He's got a tremendously high IQ. The only real concern ever with him, from my standpoint, is can he remain healthy? Can he sustain it over a significant period of time? Because you got to be able to rely on your star players. You know, and we see a similar dynamic playing out in Philly, right, with the young Joel Embiid. Is he going to get to a point where we know we can count on him for 70 to 75 games every season?
Greg Anthony joins us from Turner Sports. Everyone's still trying to figure out what's going on with the Cleveland Cavaliers. I mean, they give a pretty good fight to the Warriors, but it's not enough to even stay within 10 in the final score. Do you think that when Isaiah Thomas is fully healthy and fully implemented into this offense, it closes enough of a gap with the Cavaliers and the Warriors to make the Cavaliers' run realistic?
I think look, right now they just suck. I mean, they really do in terms of trying to integrate IT back. He's not right. He's not ready yet. It's going to take some time. And everybody now is kind of going to have to adjust. They still defensively are challenged at times, and I don't think that the motivation there. Like, you make a great point. Like the Golden State game, they had motivation, and the problem, though, is they mentally can't sustain it for 48 minutes, right? Because they were as good as they needed to be for about 28 minutes of that game. And then that's where you saw then they couldn't sustain it. And for Golden State, it's a non-issue to sustain, right? Because every game has ebbs and flows. But even when it isn't going well, generally, if you're an elite team, you have an ability to figure out a way to keep yourself connected, to stay in the game until you can get that burst. They don't have that right now. I do think they're going to get it, but I'm not getting to the big picture of Golden State yet, because I don't think we give enough credit to how good Toronto and Boston are. Like, they're better teams than they were a year ago. And I think Cleveland's better than they were a year ago, or will be once they get to the postseason. But right now, they're about where they were a year ago. And so that gap's been closed a little bit.
Okay, so you're buying.
I think those teams are legit.
You're buying on the Raptors then as a legitimate title contender.
Yes, I think the Raptors. this is a different Raptors team. I think, it's one of those things, like, a lot of times we don't want to believe our eyes. Like we look at the Raptors and we just want to think that the Raptors are the same team they've always been. But they are a different animal. They are a much improved offensive team. Their ball movement, their spacing, they're playing the game now the way I believe you got to be able to play it to win, right? I mean, look at DeMar DeRozan. He's improved as an offensive player. He's shooting 35 from 3 now. He's shooting threes for that matter. He's up to 5 assists a game. His ball movement, he's improved. Kyle Lowry's had to change and alter his game. Then you look at, the guys that they brought in and how well they're playing. C.J. Miles has been terrific. Their young players are getting better. Siakam and Portal and Powell and then the young kid, O.J. Anunoby. They're a better basketball team than they were a year ago. They just are across the board. And so while, you want to look at the core guys, it's the supporting cast that's starting to elevate them. And I think similarly with Boston, and what's scary about Boston is that, even with Kyrie, their best players, their best basketball is ahead of them. Kyrie hadn't gotten to his prime yet. And it's kind of scary when you think about it. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, those guys are going to get better. I don't know if they can get better enough this year to where you can say, they can win it, but they're trending in the right areas. And so they're just better teams. And the other thing that they have this year more than they've had in years past, I believe, and this is the confidence. I don't think going into the postseason last year, those teams believed they could beat Cleveland. Even though Cleveland had that really rough regular season, I still think deep down, and to me it kind of showed, that LeBron's still the best player, and I just don't think they believe that they could beat his team. I don't know that confidence is lacking as much this year as it's been in years past. And that's going to be a concern, that when you get to a point where you believe, confidence is 80% of the game in every sport. And I think Boston and Toronto are starting to really believe that they can win the East. And I think that's going to create even more of a challenge for Cleveland, who I still think will win. But right now they're not a very good basketball team. And it's going to take them some time. It's not a switch to flip. It's going to take them some time to work through all of this and to get mentally ready. They don't have the young guns that Golden State has, and they don't just have the overall talent that Golden State has that allows them to sustain that high level of success over the course of the regular season.
Right.
It's always going to be more of a challenge for Cleveland during the regular season. But they generally, when you get in the playoffs, and we saw it last year, they will be able to go at a different level because scheduling changes as well, as does the fact that now you're into the postseason, where from a Cleveland standpoint, and really Golden State as well, that's all that matters. Nobody's going to focus on what your record was in the regular season. Nobody talks about the fact that Cleveland won 51 games last year.
Right. Greg Anthony joining us from Turner Sports, NBA analyst. Check him out with the Players Only franchise. It moves to TNT on Tuesdays, beginning next week, January the 23rd. Follow Greg on Twitter as well, at GregAnthony50. GA, always a pleasure, buddy. Thanks so much.